Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality and is about discovering your place in this great universe from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guest, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight, we are going to be talking about our life story, the dances that we've done, the mishaps we've had, the challenges that we've overcome for self, for safety, security, for love, for companionship, for family, for our land, for our places to belong. What is our life story all about? Can we look at it in reflection and find only the regrets, the shame, and the guilt? Perhaps we reflect and we only look at the high parts. It was great, and we create an illusion. Isn't life but all an illusion? It's truly about our soul and the dances that it encounters. I went here, I experienced this, and this is the story. So we are really just a soul spirit reporting those adventures we've had in our life existence. And isn't that exquisite when we could take away the judgment, we could take away the pain and hurt, we can take away the times that say it's going to have so much fear I cannot go on. In essence, they are all moments of time, space, time. Think of yourself as you go into the movie studio and you're just looking there and you're creating your life story. You're giving a lot of the pieces, the puzzles that are going back together. You're putting all of the names together, perhaps pushing things a little bit tighter and closer together than they had been before, and maybe just taking some and using a little fine eraser and saying, not right now. What is our life story we'd like to leave behind? What is the one we'd like to dance within this present moment in time? And what is the life story that we would like to say, I can see, I came, I experienced, and what a joy it has been. Today, my guest is Sarah Lutterodt. Her book is Worlds Apart, a Memoir of Uncertain Belonging. And this is a book about Sarah's life, and it is so very well documented and danced through. It has emotion, inspiration, validation, and it definitely has. She has been here, and it made her mark on the world. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
It's a real pleasure to be with you, Dr. Jeanette.
I'm so glad to have you, Sarah. I think sometimes people will write their books and they want to pick out all the hard things, and they when it comes to the end, you go, oh, okay, well, what happened? You're still here. Or still others create something and they're afraid to let their souls and hearts shine. Don't you think your book is truly, you let your heart and soul shine?
Well, I tried to do that, and I worked with a writing coach. I was a scientist, and I had done a lot of technical writing. So it was really hard for me to touch base with my emotions and try and express those deeper things. But that's what I tried hard to do, and hopefully it came through, at least some of the lessons I've learned and some of the experiences I've had at a deeper level.
Yeah. I think, Sarah, sometimes when we look back at our life, we say, did that really happen that way? Don't you think we all come up against those moments in time when we go back right to the beginning?
Yes, and certainly, some of the stories I tell, some of the people who were there at the time may have experienced those same moments very differently. But yes. What I've tried to do is not just tell it as it was then, but as I see it now, looking back with the benefit of my age and reflection and my subsequent experience. And it has many of those incidents take on a different light, but each incident contributed to who I am and to the very rich life I've been able to live.
Yeah, so that's very important. In the year 2024, people are telling their stories and they're looking back, and they're using the eyes of today. However, they're also using the judgment of today. Oh, that was a bad thing. Look at that. We didn't have this. We didn't have that. We went through that. Wasn't that horrible? when in essence, when we look back and we step back into time and engage in that moment to write our story, we are also experiencing it from that moment in time. And I think that's so vitally important, because then you are writing from that perspective within, instead of pointing the finger, thinking I'm Mr. Know-It-All, don't you think?
Well, I almost think I had it the other way around. I thought I was Mr. Know-It-All back then, and as I looked back on my life, I realized I was so judgmental. And when people said or did things which at the time seemed very racially offensive because of my biracial family, I was very judgmental of them. And now, in retrospect, I say, well, they were just ignorant and hadn't woken up, and they hadn't had the benefit of all the education and experience that I've had, so I should be less judgmental. I should see them as who they were at the time and try to not be so judgmental as I was back then, maybe. So in a way, I reverse what you're saying, in a way.
Yeah, I think the idea sometimes when we talk about biracial, and you shared in your book, I know for myself, I grew up in the Northeast. It was all white, and that's the way it was. And it was a very tiny, small community. And I think the idea that everybody came from somewhere else originally. In other words, the area was immigrants from New York City, in the early 40s and 30s who came and they settled in it. It was north of Scranton. And when I think of it, it was the Irish, the Italian, Polish, Lithuanian, German, Slovaks. And each one formed their own little tiny community for survival. And as their families grew, their families stayed within that 2 to 3 mile radius all the time. And that's the way it went on for generation after generation. But however, with yours, you had started out in one area, and when you left that area, when you started out within England, I think also, too, the idea is that we look and we kind of go to different areas to find out more about the different areas. Some people didn't do that, so that formed a lot of judgment. Oh, I don't know about those people over there. But you and I, having moved other locations, we got to see something different. Do you think that sometimes that's the crack in the surface, so to speak?
Yes, I think certainly when you travel, it opens your mind to other ways of thinking and being. But when I look back at that, my first long experience in Africa, which was in the University of Cape Coast, which is where I met my husband, there was a fairly substantial expatriate community at that time. And we felt, I tried not to distance myself a little bit from the presumption that we know and we've got to teach the Ghanaians how. And boy, over the years, I realized, my goodness, that's a tremendous amount of hubris in that position. Were we really trying to understand how the Ghanaians were experiencing our presence? And I don't think so. And now, being married to a Ghanaian, I can see that our presence was much more problematic than we felt it was at the time. So, it's been a very, very gradual opening of my eyes to a different perspective.
But in essence, you are not hanging out as though it was harmful. Do you know what I'm saying? In other words, you didn't take your judgment or others' judgment and use it as a tool to increase victimhood. Do you know what I mean? You had taken it as an experience and kept moving through. I think that is important, too, because sometimes people will take their indifferences, hold it up as their identity, and they can't see anything past that. In other words, are we all human beings, or are we all in these separate silos existing, perhaps?
Yeah, I tried very hard not to come across as a victim and to try and reinterpret some of the things I experienced with other viewpoints in mind. For example, I had a very, very hard time adjusting to the business world in America. I was working with people who had come off the Navy submarines, and they hadn't had much education. They were very bright and they did a very good job, but they were very limited. And they gave me a hard time, and I didn't understand the first thing about where they came from. But in looking back, I tried to say, well, they were as fearful of the situation as I was. I was terrified of losing my job because I'd worked so hard to get a decent job once I came to the U.S. because my qualifications weren't really valued at all. And so looking back and writing the book, it's helped me to really realize how much you have to try and understand other people's perspective and what has conditioned their way of looking at it. And I've had the chance to grow outside my own bubble. What could I do to maybe help people just crack their own bubble a little bit and move forward in their own understanding?
You know, I think your entire book, to me, is all about finding stability, safety, and security. However, I think what I really come to is stability and security can only be found within versus a place, a location, a position, a job, or a relationship. And I think right in the beginning of your book, when you start to talk about Germany and England, and I had circled the word right on the page, and it says that although my mother was born and raised in England and always thought of herself as English, her family was of German origin. And I think that's important because really if we ever ask ourselves, and you shared back in the book on the back, towards the back, about someone asking you where is home, you know, where is home? What is that all about? Is it a location or is it within us? And I think almost everyone, if we truly sat down and went back in history, we would all find that we've all come from, quote, someplace else, you know, our lineages, and they've all been very migratory type of lineages. Almost all ancestors have come from somewhere else. Do you know what I mean? It's very rare you'll find a lineage that we came here, we stayed here for the past thousands of years, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, that's especially true of America.
Right.
But it's also true of my own background. My father had come from Ireland, my mother from Germany.
Right.
And in Ghana, yes, it's true on the coast where there's been a lot of mixing of people, but if you go further into the interior, you find villages that are very frozen in time in a way, that live a very traditional life still. So I think it does vary from person to person, but you know, it's been immensely enriching to have moved around and to experience different. And it's married to a Ghanaian, to have been able to see from their perspective, to being forced out of my narrow British way of looking at things. So it's been a great blessing in my life. But it's true, as you say, that I mean, I end up saying, you know, we always have to say, I just don't know. Let me take the moment as it is. I end up with quoting from that poem, a Buddhist poem about, you know, the open bowl, of being open to the moment. And I really try to live my life in my old age that way.
Mm-hmm. You know, also, too, Sarah, you had on this one that I underlined it again, it says, dependable world in which I was nurtured. And that's under the heading, the chapter says, a rich tapestry. Do you think perhaps as you've had help, you've had private schools, you've had a different kind of upbringing than a lot of other people? It's not, I won't call it higher echelon, I will just call it different because we are all in the same plane, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So, in essence, do you think that you had those experiences and now that you can look back at them, do you have a different outlook on the way they were playing out?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think on the one hand, I mean, I use this metaphor of the container, which I take from Franciscan Richard Rohr. I don't know if you've come across his writing. Mm-hmm. He's been enormously influential on me. He talks about the two parts of life, and if you don't grow up in a container with a certain level of security, however rigid and however limited, you're floundering for the rest of your life. That gives you security to move on. And I certainly, in my childhood, this very limited vision gave me that. But definitely, I needed to move on. I mean, the class structure was so defined, and you know, you couldn't step outside the limits. Racially, there was no issue because there were no people of another race within sight. But religion-wise, we were very defined by our Catholicism. We were a minority in England at the time. So there's all that rigid, and the Catholic school I went to was, you know, full of the traditions of Catholicism, good and bad. And I still acknowledge and recognize the wealth of mystical experience and social justice work and so on within the Catholic Church, so I'm still a Catholic, but I recognize the limitations of the way it was presented to me as a child. So I've grown beyond all that, I believe, but nonetheless that provided a structure that held me as a child, and which I believe gave me a great deal of confidence later in life. It wasn't immediate, because I was very lost in a way in my early 20s, but later in life I could see that as an important structure in my life, but one that I needed to step away from.
When you talk about Oxford, and we always think back in the late 60s, early 70s, that was a time where I think the earth had I call it a cracking open, or in other words, a burp, so to speak. People spoke out very quickly, very fluently, very violently, at times very noisy, very powerful. So I think there were several years there when people started to say, hey, I'm over here, I have something to say, and it's justice, injustice, trauma, it's danger, it's no, we are not going to take it anymore kind of idea, or this is the way the world should be. So in essence, I really see it as a little glimpse into how the world is going to evolve and change, but it's just a glimpse. Because then all of the people who made those noises and stuff kind of settled back in. They got married, they had kids, the hippies went away, and time quieted down. Do you think that might have been similar to an experience of yours?
Yes, I think the experience growing up in England was a little different from America. We didn't have quite the issues that you had in the 60s and the Vietnam War that played out in America. But we had a very active, we called it the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, which was led by Bertrand Russell, and which was protesting against the nuclear bases, the American nuclear bases in England. And that was a very strong motivator. Then there was the other motivator was the overthrow of the colonial possessions, and that motivated a lot of young people to say, well, what awful things have we done overseas, and what can we do to help redress it? And that, I guess, was part of why I went overseas in the first place. But I still went as a conquering hero in a way. That was what was so interesting to discover when I wrote the book. In a way, I was still going as a conquering hero, even though it was a much softer type of conquering.
You know what I think it is so important, too, Sarah, to understand is that was before the internet. That was before people were doing a lot of travel. Travel was expensive then. I mean, I remember in the 60s, I got to go on a plane, and it was like you dressed up with your dress and your stockings, and it was a fancy. I'm sure you remember. It was a privilege to be able to get on that plane, and not everybody did it. I would say less than 2% of the people did. And also, too, television. I remember, when I was in college, I got my first credit card because that was the very first year that they came out, that women could get them that were single. And I got
unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and I got a small black and white portable TV for my college room. And I thought, wow, we never even had a portable when I grew up, or we barely even had TV. So I think the idea is that to know what you experienced in your continent, in your area, in your life, is very much a silo. I mean, in other words, we're all on the earth, but we really don't know everything that happened to everybody else. Don't you think?
Absolutely. And even though my upbringing was very narrow in many ways, I give my parents a lot of credit for allowing me to have a further education, which many girls in my social milieu did not have that opportunity, and that was a tremendous blessing and a tremendous gift that they gave, and they were very much influenced by a relative who was a very eminent archaeologist, and really, I think, advised them on my education. But it was very rare, and it was a great gift to have that opportunity to move out. And of course, moving to university, you had to open your eyes. You had, that's what universities are all about. You couldn't some people did still live in their bubble, but that wasn't my experience. And that was where I met people who were interested in working overseas, and how I eventually went to work in Africa myself.
Right, because I remember that was what they were starting to have the Peace Corps, I think, was that about then when I was in school.
It was exactly. Yeah. And Ghana was one of the first countries that had Peace Corps, actually.
Right.
Ghana and one other country, I'm trying to remember. I think it was the Philippines. And yes, it was little, that had already started just. Well, of course, the Peace Corps was started by Kennedy in 1961. So when I went to Ghana, it was 1968. So it was beginning to be established. But it was all fairly new, and yes, it's been a great blessing to have the opportunity to meet different cultures, and then always to recognize how difficult it is to meet people where they are and to really understand what's going on. And as I reflect on my relationship with the many Ghanaians I interface with, we spend many months there every year, people from all sorts of difficult it is sometimes to really, well, it's impossible to really bridge that difference, and you just have to remain open and learn what you can about what they're thinking, who they are.
I think that's so vitally important what you just said, Sarah, because there were people that were going in the Peace Corps to go out and do good for those that had less. However, there were also the other ones that were being sent away to war to plunder the people who they believed were doing them wrong. If you look at that in an intellectual, philosophical, existential way, you go, well, holy crap, what the heck happened? What happened to us in that 10-year period?
Well, I'm sure the Peace Corps people learn more from the countries they go to than they are able to give. There's no question in my mind, but they come back so enriched by what they've experienced, and then they become a source of great openness in the societies where they land back in America. So,
but then you look at the people who had been having to be sent off to the war, Vietnam or the Gulf War or whatever it was, awful. And they came back as a detriment to themselves and to the world around them. They came back destroyed. So it's just such a contrast of how people in that age group had to exist and endure every day. Am I going to get called up to the draft, or am I going to go to Canada? I remember distinctly, there were kids, in my same age group. Are we going to Canada? Are we going to go to try to enroll in school in California? Or are we going to go to the Peace Corps? Those are our three choices,
Right.
And it's dangerous.
That trauma of the Vietnam War didn't really touch us in Britain at all, so I was spared that. In fact, I've had such a blessed life, because other than being born during the World War II and having those early years of dim recollection, there's been no war that has, there was the Korean War that was far away, but wars didn't touch us then in Britain as they do now. And of course there wasn't the exchange of information that lets us know what all the horrors going on in Gaza and Sudan and in Myanmar. It's too much to take, really, all that's going on in the world right now.
Do you think perhaps we as people, before the internet, of course, but we'll talk about this for a second, before the internet, we kind of created a world within a circle of circumference of an area. We created a world in which we believed this was something that we could do. We got this, If it's plundering, if it's killing, if it's doing good, if it's intellectual, if it's education, if it's rich or if it's money, whatever it is. You take an area and you find a way to be able to exist in that area. And I think that's important, because now, as we look at it in the year 2024, when we start finding out about these areas that are doing things like that, or doing things that we believe shouldn't be occurring, we tend to speak about it, talk about it, get a change, go in there and try to change them. And I wonder, is that our purpose, to have everybody else in, quote, alignment? Let's go back to the beginning of your book again. All about alignment, confinement. You follow the norm. You follow the dogma. So is there an existential dogma out there that we are all trying to conform to, even in this year?
Absolutely there is. There's a dogma in British life. There's a dogma in American life which transcends political differences and which is not shared by other countries.
Right.
When I listen to people in Ghana today, the legacy of colonialism, the resentment against the multinationals who are exploiting their wealth still,
yes.
It's alive and well, and there are presumptions in their conversations that are totally alien and are not easily understood or grasped by people who live with the presumptions of American society. That's why, as a couple, we find ourselves always at a crossroads, because Clement brings with him a whole set of assumptions, although he's had a very Western education in many ways, and he grew up in a very Anglophile family. There are certain assumptions deep in the society that are quite different from the presumptions that exist in American society, and people don't understand. Well, why on earth would somebody think like that? And definitely, each culture has that. And you've got to look at the Israel-Arab conflicts and so on. It's all over, and we just have to open our eyes to the fact that other people think differently. And what is it that they think? Even if we don't understand, let us say to ourselves, I just don't understand. I don't know where you're coming from. Your background is different. You live with a different set of assumptions. Let me recognize that you are different, and I have difficulty in understanding that. That humility, I think, is so important as we deal with other cultures.
Yeah, I call it the word reverence. It's true reverence for the soul. Because if we look at it, all of that is story that we wear on our human wetsuit, and it's badges. It's like badges that are stuck to us about all of our experiences we've gone through, all of our judgments, our regrets, whatever it is. It's all stuck on the outside of it. So we're really seeing the world from that experience. And I look back, and I wonder if we'll ever come to the precipice where we will say, can we have reverence for each other's soul and let some of this other stuff drift away? I know for myself, I think we're at a point in the past few years, and definitely coming up in the next few, there's going to be a great clashing of all things. All things, I don't think there's anything that's going to be left unturned, so to speak, tilling the soil. And when we look at that, we say, is the soul meant to be totally free of this human story, or are our life existences always meant to be these different life stories? Because when you look at it, I think about back at Hurricane Katrina here in New Orleans where I live. And after it, all of these people started coming in. We're going to come in. We're going to help. We're going to build your houses. We're going to do this, that, and the other. Well, they built us houses, except they knew nothing of the area in which we live. We don't seal our houses. We leave them to have air flow through because it's so hot here. It just doesn't work. We use different woods, and they have to be treated because we're wet all the time. It's a wet humidity thing. We can't use a nail because a nail will rust within a year. We use different things. So I think the idea is, do we take our ideas and our judgments and always see others through that? Or do you think perhaps in the next several years, some of this will start coming up and we're all going to say, the heck with it all, we're all the same, let's let it go? Do you think we'll eventually get to that?
I don't think it's either. I think it's remaining open. I think differences will always be there, but remaining open to difference is what's important. Your New Orleans example of people coming in and building with the wrong wood, I mean, that's very much like the experience that people have in Africa. You don't come here and do things like you did overseas. And you have to acknowledge, don't do away with the differences, but recognize them. Recognize them and recognize how often, sometimes they're buried, and sometimes people, well, often they put a mask on. They don't show up those differences. So, so you don't know where the assumption, you don't know where the reaction's coming from because they haven't really told you. But just remaining open to people as they are, and recognizing your frailty, one's own frailty, and their frailty, because we all have our shadow side. We all have our frailty. And then, as Richard Rohr says, everyone belongs. It's both and,
Do you think it's perhaps, Sarah, that when we see that, let's take an example, someone from the North where the temperatures really go above 80, and all of a sudden they come down here and they're like, oh my God, I don't know how you could deal without air conditioner. Make sure every house has an air conditioner. Blah 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 blah. We've lived without air conditioning, for forever here. Some people have, and to say that they have to have it, but then people they go back home to the north and they'll say, oh, I'm putting an air conditioner here because I don't ever want to experience that again. So in essence, is it fear? Is it self-preservation? Or is it a fear of, oh my gosh, I don't want to ever have or feel or be in the situation I saw within them. I don't ever want to have that in my life. So is it all about the self again?
I think there's a lot of fear at the root, of fear of letting go of the certainties that have driven one's life and opening oneself up to difference. I think there's a lot of fear there. That example of me with the Navy nukes, I was afraid of them because they were making my life miserable, and they were afraid of me because I brought an expertise they didn't know how to handle. And if we'd recognized our fear, we might have been able to communicate better, and it wouldn't have been so difficult for both parties. So I think there's fear at the fear is a lot of what lurks in our subconscious. Yes, definitely.
I think it overtakes us, and it becomes what we are. In other words, if we can understand that it's an existence out there, so to speak, then we say, are we living from inside out, or are we living from outside in?
That's right. That's right.
And I think when we can realize and say, I'm human, I'm going to have both of those existences at some point in my life, and I'm okay with that. But the difference is I want to be aware of what and when I'm doing it. Perhaps.
That's right. I think we don't do the inner work. We don't really examine ourselves. And it was really a revelation to me, the white entitlement, recognition of white entitlement. I lived in a biracial arrangement for 40 years or more. And suddenly I said, oh my God, yes, that's who I am. That's what I do. I'm assuming I'm white is right. And my poor husband, he's had to put up with that all these years. It wasn't overt, and I certainly, knew my children had gone through different things, but it was a new level of recognition in myself of what I had carried with me since childhood, and the presumption that, that life would be all right. And so I think it's an ongoing work that we have to do to do the inner work in order that we will live in harmony with those around us.
I can distinctly remember so many times in my life, people would look at me, and I had blonde hair, stilettos, you know what I mean? I'm white, I'm this, I'm educated, I have 3 degrees, blah, 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 whatever. And they would always form an assumption. And then I would say something, and they would say, oh, that's not you. You must be making that up. Oh, my gosh, she's just doing that or saying that because she wants to be, quote, like us or whatever. And it's like they are so stuck on the facade. And what I was doing was appearing as the facade, and they bought it. They believed the facade, and I was going, that to me, it just was heart-wrenching because people could not see beyond that, whatever that might be.
Facade, yeah.
Yeah,
that's right.
Just as you wrote in your book, if you come from Africa, we expect you to be poor, And I can distinctly remember, I had gone to college, and I came back to my home area for a little bit, for a few days or weeks or whatever. And they said, oh, yeah, you came back and you thought you knew it all. And I'm going, oh, my gosh. And I think those of us who are, for my whole self, I've been open my whole life. And I have never, it is not ingrained, it has never been taught to me. It has never been my dogma. It has been, quote, the me, is that I don't see labels. I never have. I don't understand rich and poor. I could walk up to the richest guy in the entire world with my sneakers and T-shirt on and say, hey, Bob. And to me, I'm connecting on that level. I don't see whatever's around him or whatever's in him. I don't see that. It's been that way. And I don't see color. I don't see education. I don't see those labels. All of my doctors have always been every single ethnic group, or
well,
every
I think
single race.
That's a blessing that you have, not to see those differences. On the contrary, my upbringing made me see differences everywhere and distinctions. And so I have to, if I meet somebody and I can catch myself thinking, this person belongs to that class, or they didn't have the right. I catch myself thinking those things, and fortunately, it's a blessing that I begin to recognize that and pull back from it and open myself to the person nonetheless. But no, my upbringing taught me to see difference everywhere, and that's what I'm trying. That's what I've tried in my life to sort of move beyond. But so we come from different places, and so we have different struggles, different.
Yeah, because I totally see it, is that it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with them. They have such a thick armor of their whatever, their story, whatever that is. And I don't see it. I can't tell you how many times people would say to me, even my daughter, she says to me, be careful, Mom doesn't have a filter. Whatever comes out is the truth, and whatever you get, she has no filter on her, whatever she says. Because I don't see through that, and I've never, ever seen through that. And I think it's not that I go out and I try to teach others to be without their filters. I just share my story, just as you shared your story, and then people can find their own. So what we're really doing is sharing an example, an opportunity, and then you find your own opportunity for your own inspiration, your own life guide, perhaps?
That's right, and we're all fallible human beings. We're all fallible human beings. We're all needy in different ways, and we have to recognize who we are, recognize our shadow, recognize our frailties, and not run away from them.
Right. I think the idea of fear, is just, it is so large. I talk about fear all the time, and I'll say, just go in a white room and I want you to welcome fear in, and they're like, what? I'll say, well, I'm really afraid. I said, no, fear. I want you to welcome fear in. And they'll be like, they can't see the difference in that. Do you see what I mean? And I think the idea is that, is it something out there that's going to come at us? You talk in your book about being outliers, so many times, even when I have patients, and even myself, I have done this. I've gone to the doctor, and he would say, well, I never heard that before. That mustn't be right. And I'd say, obviously, you only treat horses, not zebras. There's a saying in the medical...
Well, the doctors pretend to know it all, and they're afraid of being found out. That's what I realize.
Right.
So they have to pretend that they know it all and have all the answers, because that's what they're supposed to do as doctors. But they don't, but they're afraid of being found out, so then they put on this facade, I'm Dr. So-and-so.
Right, but also, too, the idea is it's in the medical community, is that when you come in with the sniffles, you've got a cold. When you come in a pain in your side, you look here. If you have this, it's got a headache. And in other words, they're all horses. You don't look for the zebra, this outlying thing that could be occurring. And I had said to that doctor specifically, I said, thank you. I said, you have just shown me you are not the expert on zebras. You're an expert on horses. And I had to go find somebody else. So I think the idea is that can we see our own unique individuality within ourselves and others and truly celebrate that, right?
And then recognize that the doctor is in saying what they say. They're operating out of their own insecurity and their own issues and their own story, and being open to the fact that they are fallible in giving advice, even though they pretend they're not. So, you know, it's just like being open to their human frailty as well. And I think that's something I've learned in writing this book, that it's not only my own human frailty I have to recognize, but I have to recognize that people are not bad. They're just operating out of a different set of assumptions and from a different place of frailty and neediness.
Right. Because there are so many silos in the world. I mean, you know, myself being a naturopathic physician, you turn around and there's a silo we have to exist within. There's a silo that the MD has to exist within. The priest has to exist within. And what's happening is a lot of these glass silos are shattering, and people are saying, I want something more. I want to be able to help. I want to be able to exist. I want to be able to inspire and reach out to others in a different way. That's where I think this decade we are in right now is about silos shaking, perhaps. Right.
And people are very nervous. I mean, look at Christian nationalism. People are very nervous of the silo no longer existing. And it's really sad to see. It's really sad to see they're doing that in the name of Christianity. So, but yeah.
But isn't that because they are insecure within themselves who they are, that they are something different? So I think that the idea, just as you shared, in your book, Worlds Apart, this is a story. This is a story where you've been, but this isn't your identity, so to speak. In other words, you can still breathe. You are still in existence, even if you're stripped of all of that. I think of all the hurricanes here. We lose everything. You lose a job. You lose everything that you know. You lose your area, everything, everything. Church, grocery store, everything. People that don't come back and everything. You're stripped of all of that. And you say, okay, well, we have today to breathe. What are we going to do today? Pick up a rock, pick up a nail, pick up a piece of board, and start over. So the idea is that, are we afraid of being stripped down and saying, I now have to rebuild myself from something that's more valuable than my identity? Or is my identity more valuable to me in the world around me?
Right, and I think, as Richard Rohr talks about the two halves of life. There's a time of life when I'm a mother, I'm a physicist, I'm a consultant, whatever it may be, and that's how we define ourselves. And then as we sort of gradually recognize that that's a very secondary to what we really are, what we really should be, which is people who love others, basically.
Right. Right, absolutely. It's so different when we look back at it, all the things that are going on in the world, and we say, how can we reflect on our life? And I think your story is really a great story because you really did look at your life in all dimensions of time, in all the stories of time, and you really took us on a great adventure. And I really think, Sarah, that your book is eloquently written because it doesn't hit you over the head with saying, right or wrong. It just says, this is. So you've really written from the portion of an experienced and an observer, don't you think?
Well, that's what I tried to do, and thank you for saying those things. And if people are interested, they know where to go to get it. It's on Amazon. Yes.
Do you also have a website, Sarah?
No, I don't. I've resisted that.
Okay, that's fine.
I've resisted that. I am on LinkedIn, and if people can find me on LinkedIn if they want to.
Very good.
And, of course, the book is available on Amazon, and we're going to be doing an audio version. I'm having the audio version made in Ghana because I have a friend who produces professional audio in Ghana, which I really love to support the local activity. And we've got a big event coming up in November where the British High Commission is going to be there, and we're going to be talking about the book and trying to promote it. And any profits from the book, any margin will go to a set of schools, projects which a friend and I are working on, some schools in our locality near our house in Ghana, where there's a tremendous dearth of every sort of amenity. And we started by building a little house for the kindergarten people who were, up to that point, they had just a roof and mud underneath. I mean, it was pathetic. So last year we put up a little house, and now we're trying to put a little schoolhouse for them, and now I've put a fence around that so the bigger children can't invade their space, and then from there other things too. So any proceeds from the book will go to that. So that's on the website too, or on the Amazon site too. The beneficiary of any sales.
Well, Sarah, it was such a pleasure to have you with us today, as I say, to dance in the ethers. In other words, to step back to be able to look at something in its presence. And we really thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm really interested in your somewhat different perspective on things, because you, as a homeopathic doctor, you have different assumptions. We proceed from different assumptions and trying to remain open to a very different perspective. But really, when you dig deep enough, it's all one. It's all one when you dig deep enough.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Jeanette.
If you'd like to find out more information about Sarah Lutterodt, again, the book is Worlds Apart, a Memoir of Uncertain Belonging. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go directly to the link, find out more information about her book and her work. And we also would say, please have compassion. Please be aware. have some kind of ease and grace. Maybe open up some of the armor that you're carrying, or perhaps let some of those silos fall away. Life is taking a grand gesture. The earth is going to have this great big burp, and all of a sudden, things are going to shift, and it's coming up within the next 3 to 5 years. And the idea is that, are we going to live in fear until then? Are we going to live in fear and hold on dearly? Or are we going to say, we got this? You can put out your hand, extend your hand to anyone around you, and that's all that's important. Everything else is just story. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher. Until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit drjeanettgallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.